Morning. This is Theo Witsell with the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. I'm going to speak today about county natural heritage inventories as planning tools for natural areas protection. And I'm going to sort of use as an example the first ever county natural heritage inventories by our agency, which are done in extreme northwestern Arkansas in two counties at once. And these are Benton and Washington County. These two counties are the northwesternmost two counties in the state. They border Oklahoma on their western border, and Benton County borders Missouri on the northern border. They are within the Ozark Highlands, the Ozark Plateaus, and Boston Mountains level 3 ecoregions. And they're also notable because they're the fastest growing counties in Arkansas in terms of the human population. And as such, they're the area of the most rapid loss of biodiversity. So really, these are the two highest priority counties from that perspective. So what are county natural heritage inventories? Well, these are targeted reports, and in this case, GIS products as well, that are sort of tailored to the educated public decision makers, municipalities, conservation organizations, people working for conservation ends in the region. And they address sort of four basic questions. What are the biodiversity of these counties? Where are the most ecologically sensitive or highest priority ecological areas in the counties? What are the best remaining opportunities for conservation, which may or may not line up with that previous one? And how does the biodiversity overlay with other open space planning objectives in that region? And they're based largely on natural heritage data from the state natural heritage programs. And these are, of course, are examples or localities for animals, plants, and natural communities of conservation concern. If you zoom in into that heritage data, you'd see something like this, which show the specific locations represented in different ways. There's different error, different precision to the records, and so on. But these represent the occurrences of these species. They also will allow us to go in and design conservation sites around these clusters of element occurrences, or even individual element occurrences in some cases. And we've been using heritage data for conservation planning within our agency and other conservation partners like the Nature Conservancy for decades, but we've kind of done a poor job in Arkansas with providing that information to everyone else that could be using it. And that's what the county natural heritage inventories are looking to address. Our county natural heritage inventories take a little different approach than most of the other ones. We've looked at some excellent ones from Pennsylvania and other programs sort of as models, but we've sort of added our own twist to it. Ours have 5 major parts. There's a summary of the natural history and ecology of the counties. This is sort of written in layman's terms so that it's accessible to pretty much anybody with an interest who's got some basic education on the topic. And there's comprehensive species level biodiversity summary. That's essentially a set of county checklists that are vetted by experts. There's a detailed section on the rare things or the species of concern or natural areas, natural communities of concern in the counties. There's a section on threats to biodiversity. And then there's this sort of on the ground guidance provided by these sites of high conservation value that are sort of one of the products of the inventory. This is just areas showing the level 3 and level 4 ecoregions of these two counties. I don't have time to get into that much. One thing to know about these two counties is that they historically had a lot of grassland. There were definitely parts of them that were forested historically, but a lot of them were open savanna and prairie. And that's an important thing because a lot of the imperiled biodiversity is really in those open or historically open communities. And they're still open today, of course. They've just been largely converted to non-native species. One of the sort of basic products we're doing here is to try to map the different natural communities or vegetation types, habitats of the region. And this is sort of going into the inventory, the best product we had by the Central Hardwoods joint venture. There is a finer or a little different approach being taken statewide in Arkansas right now. And these two counties are being done as part of this inventory. Another interesting thing that we're trying to do with ours is to go and bring in the historical ecology, historical ecological component to the inventory. And by doing this, and by doing all of this, we have a very small staff. So we're actually bringing in contractors who are doing a lot of the different species group sections for the inventory. And so, and we actually have a historian who specializes in ecological history working with us on this section. So we've gone back and sort of dug through the historical literature, the original land surveys, settler accounts, correspondence, various different things, looking at, there's a lot of rich quotes about how it was open savanna and prairie historically, talking about the original fauna of the area back when the full complement of species was there in the early 1800s. There's great accounts of bison being in the area. I don't have time to read too many, but I do love this one, that the bison paths were still numerous, leading mainly from one lick to another. Their heads were scattered all over the prairies, one perhaps to every 3 acres of land. A lot of references to these salt licks or bison licks in the prairies in that region. One thing I've personally worked on is digitizing natural features from the original land survey plat maps from Louisiana purchase of this area. These are coming up on 200 years old right now. And for example, you can see this buffalo lick that was mapped in the 1830s here. Also prairies, they mapped a lot of the prairies in the region, and we've digitized those, which is an excellent resource. Those are them in green with some glades that I'll talk about in a minute as part of the mapping component of this. We also dug into the museum record and the herbarium record, and we found lots of historical records. In some cases, records, the only records of species of concern in the state are from historical specimens from the grasslands of these 2 counties. Things like this Skinner's false foxglove and the Washington hawthorn. This species actually was relocated during field work for this, but it hadn't been seen in the region since the 1880s. So the different groups that are being given this sort of deep treatment, this deep inventory, again, referencing the museum record, referencing the published scientific literature, referencing field work that the contractors are doing. There's vascular plants, birds, mammals, fish, reptiles, amphibians, crayfish, mussels, karst obligate invertebrates, invertebrates, butterflies, moths, bees, grasshoppers, non-vascular plants, lichens, fungi, and some other arthropods. And just an example, this is one of the sections that was produced here for the inventory. These are the birds. There's an overview section sort of summarizing the situation with birds, the status of birds as a group in the counties. There's a section on threats, data sources and gaps, sites or habitats of high bird conservation value. This is an example, just an example. This is using plants, but it shows the format for these general checklists. There's, of course, common and Latin names, the conservation status ranks, which ecoregions they've been documented from. And every species on these lists is documented with a voucher specimen or observation of some kind, whether that's an iNaturalist observation or a museum specimen, trying to really have it a high standard for inclusion, not just a visual report. In some cases for birds, we do that, but it is a vetted checklist. And it's heavily annotated. This is just a screenshot of part of the plant list there. You can see all the voucher specimens are cited. Then there's this section on species of conservation concern, where each of these is given a more detailed paragraph length summary treatment that gets into a little more detail of threats, habitats, specific records, when it was last observed, that sort of thing. This whole effort was sort of made more difficult by the pandemic hitting us smack when we were really getting off the ground in early 2020. We had big plans for all this field work that year with staff and contractors. A lot of contractors couldn't work. Museums wouldn't let them in. They couldn't travel. We were under restrictions. So sort of as a attempt to kind of keep things going, I started these Biodiversity of Washington and Benton County iNaturalist projects. And it turned out this was a major, well, it was a major time commitment, but it was also a major source of good information. And Real quick, I looked at this yesterday. There was we're coming up on 100,000 observations between the two counties, documenting over 4,000 species in each. Of course, it's a lot of the contractors are for their groups going through and vetting records. I've looked at thousands of plant records. And we found some great additions that we had no idea about. For example, here's just an example. This is what we call lowland yellow loosestrife, Lysomachia hybrida. And this species is found only in sinkhole depression ponds in Arkansas. It's a very rare species, G1. And we had no records from Northwest Arkansas except for 2 herbarium specimens from the 1800s. These were the 4 records that we had in the heritage database, all in sinkhole ponds across the Ozarks. And then this record turned up on iNaturalist over here. And not only did it find a new species of concern occurrence, but also, of course, it was in a depression wetland that we didn't know existed. So 2 for 1. We also, during the pandemic time, used some of the funding for this to process a massive backlog of biodiversity data contained in specimens. We had a couple thousand specimens from Benton and Washington County in our herbarium, the Heritage Program. And we also worked on processing the data from other specimens as well. And that was everything from digitizing the labels to mounting specimens, getting all of that work completed. We also started a transcription process for our project for herbarium labels from the counties. And Diana Soteropoulos, our statewide digitization coordinator and botanist for the Natural Heritage Program, led this effort and created this Notes from Nature project. Plants in Northwest Arkansas. There's actually 3 different, they call them expeditions. And these transcribed tens of thousands of label transcriptions. And all of that data were then used and available to researchers working on the project. Diana also hosted some transcription workshops in Northwest Arkansas for a volunteer corps that worked with us. And this was right before the pandemic hit, which was perfect timing because then they were able to work through the pandemic. Diana published, Diana, in collaboration with another colleague and myself, published this paper in the journal Diversity, specifically talking about how we use digitized herbarium specimens and iNaturalist observations to contribute to this effort. It's pretty good paper. If you're looking for more information on the topic, this is the citation at the bottom here. And this is a flowchart figure from the paper that gets into the kind of how we were able to bring different biodiversity data for different records, either iNaturalist or the herbarium digitization effort into the county natural heritage inventories. LiDAR imagery also revolutionized this project. This became widely available in Arkansas during the early part of the study period. And I personally spent hundreds of hours probably interpreting LiDAR data in the project area and beyond. But it has been amazing for mapping communities. You know, we have heritage data, but it's just a fraction of what's out there. Most areas haven't been surveyed. So we're trying to map where natural communities are likely to occur in addition to ones we already have in the database. These are sinkhole depression ponds. It's a very rare habitat in Arkansas. We were not glaciated, so we don't have a lot of natural ancient ponds, but we do have some of these karst features, and they're full of species of concern. The way we've traditionally mapped them is to find the larger ones on topo maps. They'll show on topos with a reverse topography line. But typically, if they're smaller ponds, they don't show this at all. And we would historically look at aerial photos and try to say that looks like it might be a sinkhole pond. We would go in and sort of map it as a potential, and then we'd have to go out and look to see if it was really a natural pond. With the LiDAR imagery, however, we can look at these and see features like this earthen berm on this particular pond, and we know right off that's an artificial or human-created pond. And it's likely very young compared to a natural sinkhole depression pond. This one, however, in the center of this photo, it's quite different, and it's on a place called Pond Mountain that shows a marsh symbol on the topo, which immediately gets my interest. But then when you look at the LiDAR, it is very much a natural depression. There's no berm on it. Another thing the LiDAR's revolutionized as part of this project is the mapping of karst features, sinkholes, caves, collapses, all sorts of different features. And these, of course, are very important for the rarest biodiversity. We have a lot of single site endemics or G1 to G2 species in some of these karst areas, and of course, endangered bats, which are of concern everywhere now. This is just one example. This is on a state natural area, Devil's Eyebrow natural area, where we have spent many weeks of field work in the past, and we completely missed this major karst feature. It didn't show on the topo maps, but it stands out like a sore thumb on the LiDAR. We made many great discoveries doing some field work, some targeted field work after the restrictions were lifted. Things we found on the LiDAR, other areas that we found through aerial photography interpretation, and found many new species of concern, records of species of concern. We found new rare habitats like these fens and spring runs, and species new to the state even, like this American brook lime, and new to the region, like this mosquito fern. I've been doing a lot of mapping from aerial imagery, specifically infrared aerial imagery, like these cane breaks. Very good methodology we have for mapping cane breaks. Also assessing prairie restoration potential. One of the features of the grasslands of this region are prairie pimples, or these pimple mounds, also called nebkas. And these are ancient windblown dunes that indicate an area has never been plowed. It was historically grassland. They don't occur really east of the Mississippi River, but they're a major feature in our flatter grasslands in Arkansas. And sometimes they stand out on a specific aerial photo like this one, but other ones that are very hard to see. But the LiDAR really opens our eyes to these. We're able to map areas that, while they may be heavily degraded, converted to non-native grasses, they have never been plowed, and they may hold remnant seed banks, in fact do in some cases. So these lets us provide information on where restoration efforts might be targeted. Cliffs and talus communities, we've mapped the big ones historically from topographic maps, where you can see the topo lines converging. But with the LiDAR, wow, you can really, this is game changer for finding features like ledges, talus slides, cliffs, and it lets us really precisely map them. We can also, if you look on the right-hand side, map landslides, ancient historic landslide communities that are now forested over, that really show up on LiDAR, but not in any other format that we have. We found some unknown and undescribed natural communities like these Ozark shale barrens. We're able to map the glades from aerial photography. This shows different types of glades in the counties in different regions. And this is the Ozark shale barrens community, ancient old growth post oaks and chinkapin oaks. Just kind of running out of time, but wrapping up with some more of the just photos of some of the interesting species and communities that we found. Spring-fed oxbow pond was an undescribed natural community in the Ozarks. We found a rare example of a chert prairie remnant with some really rare plant species. We found many new records of plant species for the counties, including many new, these were all found by a contractor named Karen Willard, who's a botanist that's working on the project, found new occurrences of, dozens and dozens of species that she found new occurrences for. This particular cactus was new to Arkansas. This is the round pad prickly pear, disjunct from central Oklahoma and Texas. Lots of great vertebrate discoveries as well. Dustin's talked in this session about some of the rare fish, the darters up there. So in addition to, just to close up, in addition to the sites that we'll be identifying and providing to people interested in land protection, we're also providing a summary of different kinds of conservation strategies. The development in this area is so rampant, the land values are so high. Traditional land acquisition is not a viable solution to many of the problems that we have from conservation. So we have different other things. Yes, we want to secure protection of these places, but also in other areas, there's just compatible management, salvage and relocation of rare species, especially of plants, restoration and management of sites already in conservation, and of course, as everything, a lot of education and outreach. I'd like to acknowledge our funders, the Walton Family Foundation, the Arkansas Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism, and the Natural Heritage Commission and Department of Heritage. Thank you.